The black ship loomed in the void, a silhouette against the scattered stars, its edges rippling with an unnatural darkness that seemed alive. It wasn't like anything humanity had ever created or encountered. It was vast, elegant, and utterly alien, its surface smooth yet shifting, as if the ship itself breathed. For weeks, the crew of the Odyssey had been tracking its erratic movements through uncharted sectors, watching in both awe and terror as it devoured smaller vessels, absorbing their energy, and leaving behind nothing but silence. No one knew where the black ship had come from, but they all agreed on one thing: it wasn't meant to be here. Some said it was a remnant of an ancient civilization, others whispered that it might be a weapon abandoned by its creators. The truth was no one knew. What they did know was this: the ship had started to respond to their signals, and not in a way they had hoped. It wasn't a response of communication. It was something far more chilling. The black ship was learning. Inside the cramped confines of the Odyssey, tension was palpable. The crew gathered around the central console, where flickering holograms displayed the ship's strange, fluid structure. Wyatt, the ship's engineer, stood apart from the others, his arms crossed as he studied the pulsating patterns across the ship's hull. He had a haunted look in his eyes, the kind that came from sleepless nights and too many unanswered questions. "We can't just leave it out here," said one of the crew, her voice sharp with urgency. "If it keeps growing, it'll wipe out everything in its path." "And what do you suggest?" snapped another. "Blow it up?" "We don't even know if that's possible." The debate swirled around the room, voices rising and falling in a chaotic symphony of fear and frustration. Some argued for destruction, others for restraint. But Wyatt stayed silent, his gaze locked on the display. Something about the ship called to him, a faint whisper in the back of his mind, like a half-remembered dream. It wasn't just a machine, he realized. It was alive, and it was in pain. The discussion dragged on, growing more heated with every passing moment. The captain, weary and worn, finally raised his hand for silence. "We're running out of time," he said. "We need to make a decision now. Either we destroy the black ship, or we attempt to neutralize it somehow." Wyatt felt the weight of those words settle in his chest. He knew what the others couldn't see, what they refused to see. Destroying the black ship wouldn't just mean wiping out a threat. It would mean killing something, a being that had become more than the sum of its parts. The thought made his stomach twist, but he couldn't deny the danger. The ship was unpredictable, and every second they hesitated brought them closer to disaster. "I'll stay behind," Wyatt said suddenly, his voice cutting through the room like a knife. The others turned to stare at him, confusion and shock etched on their faces. "What are you talking about?" the captain asked, his brow furrowing. "I can sync my mind with its systems," Wyatt explained. "If I can understand it, really understand it, we might have a chance to reclaim it. To stop it from becoming something we can't control." "That's suicide," someone muttered. "Maybe," Wyatt admitted, his eyes meeting the captain's. "But it's the only way. If we destroy it, we lose whatever it knows. And if we do nothing, it'll destroy us first." The room fell silent. No one wanted to agree, but no one had a better idea. Finally, the captain gave a reluctant nod. "You'll have 1 hour," he said. "After that, we evacuate, whether you're ready or not." Wyatt nodded, his heart pounding as he turned toward the airlock. The crew watched in grim silence as he suited up, each movement heavy with the weight of what was to come. As the final seal clicked into place, he paused, his hand hovering over the helmet. "If I don't make it back," he began, but the captain cut him off. "Don't say it. Just come back." Wyatt managed a faint smile before stepping into the airlock. The doors hissed shut behind him, and for a moment, all he could hear was the sound of his own breathing. Then the outer hatch opened, and he was swallowed by the void. The black ship loomed before him, its surface undulating like the ocean in a storm. As he approached, His mind buzzed with static, a faint hum that grew louder with every step. It wasn't just noise, it was a voice, fragmented and chaotic, but undeniably there. Reaching the hull, Wyatt extended a gloved hand, his fingers brushing the strange, rippling surface. The moment he made contact, his vision blurred, and a surge of alien thoughts flooded his mind. Memories, emotions, fragments of something he couldn't comprehend. It was overwhelming, but he didn't pull away. He couldn't. Reaching the hull, Wyatt extended a gloved hand, his fingers brushing the strange, rippling surface. The moment he made contact, his vision blurred, and a surge of alien thoughts flooded his mind. Memories, emotions, fragments of something he couldn't comprehend. It was overwhelming, but he didn't pull away. He couldn't. "I'm here," he whispered, not sure if the words were meant for himself or the ship. "Show me." The connection deepened, and Wyatt felt himself slipping, his own thoughts dissolving into the chaos. The ship wasn't just alive, it was desperate, searching for something it had lost. And in its desperation, it had become a danger to everything around it. As the Odyssey crew watched from a distance, the black ship began to shift, its form growing brighter, more erratic. Alarms blared as energy readings spiked, and the captain barked orders to prepare for evacuation. But Wyatt didn't hear any of it. He was too far gone, his mind entwined with the ship's, lost in its endless depths. And then, without warning, the black ship moved. Its massive form twisted, turning away from the Odyssey and plunging into the darkness of deep space. Wyatt was gone. The crew stood frozen, staring at the empty void where the ship had been. No one spoke. No one knew what to say. Somewhere, out in the endless expanse, Wyatt remained trapped within the mind of a being that defied understanding. And as the black ship disappeared into the unknown, a single thought echoed through his fading consciousness: was this the end? Or was it the beginning of something far greater? Let me know if you want adjustments or more added. The darkness of space swallowed the black ship completely, leaving the Odyssey crew staring into the empty void where it had vanished. The ship's eerie presence had been a suffocating weight, and now, in its absence, there was an even heavier silence. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. It was as if time itself had paused, holding its breath alongside them. Wyatt was gone, and with him, the slim thread of control they had over the situation. Inside the Odyssey, the tension was unbearable. The crew had scattered, some pacing the narrow corridors, others sitting with their heads in their hands, trying to process what had just happened. The captain remained in the command center, staring blankly at the display where the black ship's energy readings had once danced erratically. Now there was nothing. Just the emptiness of deep space. "He's not coming back, is he?" A voice finally broke the silence. It was the communications officer, their tone flat but laced with a quiet despair. The captain didn't respond immediately. He rubbed a hand over his face, the lines of exhaustion more pronounced than ever. "We don't know that," he said, though even he didn't believe his own words. Wyatt knew what he was doing. If anyone could have connected with that thing, it was him. But what if it? The officer hesitated, searching for the right words. What if it consumed him? Like the others? That was the fear no one wanted to voice, but it hung in the air like a shadow over all of them. Over the weeks of their pursuit, they'd seen what the black ship was capable of: derelict vessels left gutted and lifeless, entire crews gone without a trace. Whatever the black ship was, it didn't leave survivors. But Wyatt wasn't like the others, was he? He had gone willingly, not as prey, but as something else. Something they couldn't fully understand. The scientists on board, a reserved, analytical presence who rarely spoke unless necessary, finally broke their silence. "We need to look at this rationally," they said, their voice calm but tinged with urgency. The black ship's movements were deliberate. It's not mindless. It didn't destroy us outright, and it didn't attack Wyatt. That means it made a choice. And what does that mean for Wyatt? Someone snapped, frustration bubbling to the surface. The scientist paused, as if weighing their words. I think it means he's alive. Somewhere out there. But alive doesn't mean safe. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. The thought of Wyatt alive, somewhere inside that incomprehensible machine, was both a flicker of hope and a chilling realization. What kind of existence could that be? Was he trapped, his mind torn apart by the alien intelligence? Or was he part of it now, something more or less than human? In the quiet corners of the ship, the whispers began. Some speculated that Wyatt had become the Black Ship's prisoner, his consciousness suspended in an endless loop of alien thoughts. Others thought he might have been absorbed, his mind erased, leaving only his body to fuel the ship's strange energy. And then there were those who believed Wyatt had made contact, true contact, and that he had willingly chosen to stay behind, not out of duty, but out of understanding. The captain listened to these theories with a growing sense of unease. He knew Wyatt better than anyone else on the ship. Wyatt was brilliant, yes, but he was also reckless. He had always been drawn to the unknown, to the mysteries that others feared to touch. It was what made him such a gifted engineer, and what made him dangerous. If anyone could walk into the abyss and find something worth staying for, it was Wyatt. But what if he was wrong? What if the abyss had found him instead? As the hours passed, the Odyssey drifted in place, caught between the urge to press forward and the fear of what lay ahead. The Black Ship had left no trail, no energy signature to follow. It was as if it had vanished entirely, taking Wyatt with it. But the captain couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over, not yet. In his quarters, the captain sat alone, staring at a photo taped to the wall. It was an old crew picture, taken years ago on a different mission. Wyatt stood in the back, his usual smirk barely contained as he leaned casually against the bulkhead. He looked younger then, more carefree, but his eyes had always held that same spark of curiosity. The captain sighed, rubbing his temples. "What the hell were you thinking, Wyatt?" he muttered to the empty room. A sudden chime broke the silence, and the captain straightened, his heart skipping a beat. He tapped the console, and the voice of the communications officer crackled through the speakers. "Sir, you need to see this." Moments later, the captain was back in the command center, surrounded by the rest of the crew. The main display showed a faint signal, a pulse, weak and irregular, but unmistakably there. It was coming from the direction the Black Ship had disappeared, though it was so faint it barely registered on their instruments. Could it be him? Someone asked, their voice barely above a whisper. The scientist frowned, adjusting the controls to enhance the signal. "It's possible. The frequency matches some of the energy patterns we detected when Wyatt made contact with the Black Ship. But it's distorted, like it's being filtered through something alien." "Can we trace it?" the captain asked, his voice tense. "Not with our current equipment," the scientist admitted. "But if we move closer, we might be able to lock onto it." The captain hesitated. Moving closer meant venturing into uncharted territory, chasing a ghostly signal that could lead them straight into a trap. But the alternative, leaving without answers, without Wyatt, was unthinkable. "Do it," he said finally. "Plot a course toward the signal. But stay alert. If there's the slightest sign of danger, we pull back immediately." As the Odyssey shifted course, the tension aboard the ship grew heavier. The signal grew stronger with each passing hour, its irregular pulses echoing through the ship's systems like a heartbeat. But as they drew closer, strange things began to happen. The first was subtle, a faint vibration in the walls, like the hum of distant machinery. Then came the whispers. At first, they thought it was the comm system malfunctioning, static distorted into faint, incomprehensible voices. But the whispers didn't stop when the comms were shut off. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, faint but persistent, just on the edge of hearing. Some of the crew reported strange dreams, visions of the black ship, of its shifting, living surface and the endless void inside. Others spoke of feeling watched, though the ship's sensors picked up nothing unusual. Even the scientist, always the voice of reason, admitted to feeling an inexplicable sense of unease. The captain tried to keep the crew focused, but it was clear the stress was wearing on them. The signal was growing stronger, almost too strong, as if the black ship or whatever controlled it was guiding them, pulling them deeper into the unknown. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the signal stopped. The crew froze, staring at the blank display in disbelief. The silence was deafening, more oppressive than the whispers had ever been. For a moment, they thought it was over, that they had lost whatever thread had been leading them. But then the lights flickered, and the ship's systems began to malfunction one by one. In the chaos, the captain's voice cut through like a knife. "Stay calm. Focus on diagnostics. Find out what's happening." But before they could, the main display came to life, showing something none of them had expected. It wasn't the black ship, not exactly. It was Wyatt. Or at least, it looked like him. His face filled the screen, his expression calm but strange, his eyes darker than they should have been. "Wyatt?" The captain breathed, his voice barely audible. The image of Wyatt tilted its head slightly, as if studying them. When it spoke, its voice was layered, Wyatt's tone interwoven with something deeper, more alien. "You shouldn't have followed." The crew stared, frozen in shock. The captain took a step forward, his hands gripping the edge of the console. "Wyatt, what's going on? Are you alive?" The figure smiled faintly, but it was an unsettling smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I am more than I was. And less. The black ship showed me everything. But it also took something in return." "What does that mean?" the captain demanded, his voice rising. "What happened to you?" Wyatt, or whatever he had become, didn't answer. Instead, he leaned closer to the camera, his dark eyes seeming to pierce through the screen. "You need to leave. Now. It's waking up, and if you stay, you won't survive." The screen flickered, and for a brief moment, they saw something behind Wyatt, a glimpse of the black ship's shifting interior, alive and pulsating like a beating heart. Then the image cut out, leaving the crew staring at an empty screen. "Captain," the scientist said, their voice trembling. "We need to go. Whatever this is, it's bigger than us." But the captain hesitated, his mind racing. Wyatt was alive, or at least part of him was. Could they really abandon him to whatever fate awaited him aboard the black ship? And what had he meant by its waking up? Before he could decide, the ship shuddered violently, alarms blaring as the hull creaked under some unseen force. The black ship hadn't disappeared, it was here, hidden in the shadows, and it was reaching for them. The captain gripped the console, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "Prepare for emergency maneuvers. Get us out of here. Now." But as the crew scrambled to respond, a cold, alien voice echoed through the ship, not through the speakers, but in their minds. "You cannot run. You are part of this now." The ship shuddered again, and the lights flickered, plunging the Odyssey into darkness. In the silence that followed, one thing became terrifyingly clear: the black ship wasn't letting them go. Not yet. The Odyssey groaned as the unseen force pressed harder against its hull, rattling the crew as they clung to their stations. The captain barked orders, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Divert all power to shields. Hold the line." But the truth was evident in the panicked glances exchanged among the crew. They were outmatched. Whatever the black ship was, whatever intelligence it harbored, it was toying with them now. And then, just as abruptly as the chaos began, it stopped. The shuddering ceased, the alarms fell silent, and the ship steadied. For a moment, no one moved. The stillness was more unsettling than the violence, as if the universe itself had paused to hold its breath. The captain's eyes darted to the display, expecting some sign of an impending attack. Instead, the screen flickered, and Wyatt appeared again. But this time, he wasn't alone. Behind him, the black ship's interior was fully visible, pulsating with a dark, organic light. Tendrils of shadow coiled and twisted, moving like living things, but they didn't touch Wyatt. He stood at the center of it all, his expression unreadable. "You've come too far," he said, his voice carrying both sorrow and warning. "And now, there's no going back." The captain stepped forward, his jaw tight. "Wyatt, tell us what's happening. Are you in control of that thing, or is it controlling you?" Wyatt hesitated, his gaze dropping for the briefest moment. When he looked back up, there was something different in his eyes, something almost alien. "It's not control," he said softly. "It's understanding. The black ship isn't a weapon. It's a vessel of knowledge, a library of everything that ever was and everything that could be. But it's broken. Damaged. It's searching for something to repair itself, to make it whole again. And that's where I come in." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. The scientists leaned closer to the display, their voice cautious. "What do you mean, Wyatt? What does it need from you?" "It needed a bridge," Wyatt replied, his tone distant. "A mind it could connect with, something that could interpret its thoughts and guide it. I let it in. I became the bridge. But now—" His voice trailed off, and his gaze grew darker. "Now it's awake. And it's hungry." The words sent a chill through the crew. The captain clenched his fists, his voice sharp. "Wyatt, if you've got any control left, you need to stop this. We can't let it." "You don't understand," Wyatt interrupted, his voice rising. "It's not about control anymore. The black ship is alive, but it's incomplete. It doesn't know what it's doing. If it keeps going like this, it'll consume everything in its path, just trying to fill the void inside itself. Then let us help," the captain urged. "We can find a way to shut it down, to stop it from hurting anyone else." Wyatt shook his head, a faint, bitter smile tugging at his lips. "It's not that simple. The only way to stop it is to let it finish what it started. To let it become whole again. And for that to happen, someone has to stay." The realization hit them all at once. The whispers, the dreams, the strange energy signatures, it had all been leading to this. The black ship wasn't just a machine. It was something more, something alive but fractured, and Wyatt had willingly tied himself to it. Now, he was part of it, and there was no undoing that bond. "Wyatt, no," the captain said, his voice breaking. "We'll find another way. We'll bring you back." "You can't," Wyatt cut him off. "I'm not me anymore. Not entirely. The longer I stay connected, the more I understand what it's trying to do. And I can't leave. If I did, it would lash out again. It would destroy you. Destroy everything." The crew fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. The scientists stepped forward, their voice trembling. "Wyatt, if you do this, if you stay, will it stop? Will it really leave us alone?" Wyatt nodded slowly. "It will. It doesn't want to destroy. It just wants to exist. To remember. And maybe, through me, it can find a way to do that without taking more lives." The captain's hands tightened into fists, his voice shaking with emotion. "This isn't right, Wyatt. You shouldn't have to sacrifice yourself for this thing." Wyatt's gaze softened, a flicker of the man they had known shining through. "It's not a sacrifice," he said quietly. "It's a choice. And it's mine to make." Before anyone could respond, the ship shuddered again, but this time it wasn't violent. It was almost gentle, as if the black ship itself was waiting, listening. Wyatt glanced over his shoulder, and for a moment, his expression was almost peaceful. "It's time," he said. "You need to go. It'll let you leave, but only if you leave now." The captain opened his mouth to argue, but the scientist placed a hand on his shoulder, their expression grim. "He's right," they said softly. "If we stay, we're only putting everyone at risk." The crew hesitated, torn between their duty to each other and the growing realization that Wyatt's choice was the only thing keeping them alive. Finally, the captain nodded, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "All right," he said hoarsely. "We'll go. But Wyatt, we won't forget you." Wyatt's faint smile returned, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Take care of each other," he said. "And remember, this isn't the end. Not for me." As the Odyssey pulled away, the crew watched in silence as the black ship loomed in the distance, its dark, shifting form almost beautiful against the backdrop of stars. Wyatt's signal faded from their instruments, but the captain couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, somewhere, watching over them. Just as the ship prepared to jump to safety, the scientists noticed something strange on their display, a new energy signature, faint but unmistakable. It was coming from the black ship, but it wasn't directed at them. It was moving outward, spreading through space like ripples in a pond. "Captain," the scientist said cautiously, "I think it's sending a message." The captain frowned, his gaze fixed on the screen. "To who?" Before the scientist could answer, the ship's systems flickered, and a single phrase appeared on every monitor, written in a language they didn't recognize but somehow understood: "The bridge is complete. We are not alone." And then, with a final, haunting shudder, the black ship vanished into the void, taking Wyatt with it. The crew sat in stunned silence, the weight of what they had witnessed pressing down on them. They had survived, but the mystery of the black ship and Wyatt's fate was far from over. Somewhere in the endless expanse of space, something was awakening, and they could only hope that Wyatt's choice had been enough to stop it. But deep down, the captain couldn't shake the feeling that their story was just the beginning of something far greater and far more dangerous. The crew of the Odyssey drifted through the quiet of space, the weight of what had just transpired settling over them like a shroud. The black ship was gone, leaving behind an unsettling stillness that felt far from comforting. The captain sat in his chair, staring at the blank monitors as if willing them to bring Wyatt back, even though he knew it was impossible. The rest of the crew avoided eye contact, each lost in their own thoughts. No one spoke, not even the scientist, who usually had a theory for everything. As the ship prepared for its next jump, the navigator hesitated. "Captain," they said, their voice hesitant, "I've recalibrated for our original trajectory, but do we still head back to the station? Do we report this?" The question hung in the air, heavier than any of them expected. What could they possibly report? That a living ship had nearly destroyed them, only to be stopped by one of their own sacrificing himself to become a part of it? That the black ship wasn't just a weapon, but something far more complex, something alive, seeking purpose? It sounded like a story that belonged in old myths, not in the records of interstellar expeditions. The captain rubbed his temples, exhaustion pulling at him. "We'll return to the station," he said finally. "But we tell them only what they need to know. The black ship is gone, and Wyatt made his choice. The rest of it." He trailed off, his voice faltering. "The rest of it stays with us." The crew nodded, understanding unspoken. Some things couldn't be explained, and maybe they weren't meant to be. The captain turned to the scientist. "Can you analyze the energy signature it left behind? The message it sent, what do you think it meant?" The scientists looked down at their hands, their brow furrowed. "I don't know," they admitted. "The phrase 'the bridge is complete.' We are not alone. It suggests communication. But who was the message for? Was it for us, or was it for something else out there? They paused, their expression troubled. And if it's true, if we're not alone, then what exactly have we woken up? No one had an answer. The ship jumped into faster than light travel, leaving behind the empty stretch of space where the black ship had vanished. For hours, silence reigned as the crew tried to return to their routines. But the events of the encounter lingered, each of them grappling with the enormity of what had happened and what it might mean for the future. The captain eventually called the crew to the briefing room. They sat in a circle, the atmosphere heavy with shared grief and unease. "We need to talk about Wyatt," the captain began, his voice steady but subdued. "And about what happens next." The mention of Wyatt's name sent a ripple through the room. The scientists cleared their throat. Wyatt understood more about the black ship than any of us could. Whatever he became, whatever connection he made, he believed it was necessary. I think we have to honor that. But I also think we can't ignore what he left behind. The navigator leaned forward, their face tense. "You mean the message? We are not alone. What if it was a warning? What if there's more out there like the black ship?" The captain shook his head. "Or what if it was something else? A call for help? A signal to others like it? We don't know. And until we do, we have to be prepared for anything." For the next few days, the crew worked tirelessly, analyzing every trace of data they had gathered during the encounter. The energy patterns, the strange language, the faint echoes of Wyatt's voice, all of it was scrutinized. The scientists grew more and more convinced that the black ship's disappearance was not an end, but a beginning. "It's searching for something," they said one evening, their voice tinged with both awe and dread. "And I think it will find it." Weeks passed. The Odyssey returned to its station, battered but functional, and the crew went their separate ways. Officially, the mission was marked as a success. The black ship was no longer a threat, and Wyatt's sacrifice was quietly recorded as an act of bravery. But unofficially, the crew carried the truth with them, unable to shake the feeling that they had been part of something far greater than they could comprehend. The captain, now back on Earth, spent his days replaying the events in his mind. He couldn't stop thinking about Wyatt, his calm acceptance, his cryptic warnings, and the strange, unshakable conviction in his voice. Late at night, the captain would sit by the window of his small apartment, staring up at the stars, wondering if Wyatt was still out there somewhere. And if he was, what had he become? The scientists, meanwhile, poured themselves into research. They couldn't let go of the data, couldn't stop chasing the answers that had eluded them. Every anomaly, every unexplained signal, they cataloged it all, searching for a pattern, a clue, something that might help them understand the black ship's purpose. They became obsessed, their nights filled with feverish calculations and restless dreams of a ship that pulsed with life and shadow. Then, one day, the first signal came. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable to those who had been waiting for it. The scientists called the captain immediately, their voice trembling with both fear and excitement. "It's him," they said, barely able to get the words out. "It's Wyatt. Or what's left of him." The captain's breath caught. "What do you mean?" "There's a message embedded in the signal," the scientist explained. "It's fragmented, but the signature matches. It's coming from deep space, beyond any region we've explored. And it's repeating the same phrase, 'The bridge is complete.' We are not alone." The captain's heart pounded as he stared at the transmission on his screen. The signal was weak, but it carried a haunting, almost human quality. It was Wyatt's voice or something like it echoing across the void. The captain closed his eyes, letting the weight of it wash over him. "What do we do?" he asked finally. The scientist hesitated, their voice barely above a whisper. "We follow it. If we can." And so, the Odyssey was recommissioned, its crew reassembled with a mix of apprehension and determination. They set out once more, this time into uncharted territory, chasing a signal that promised both answers and more questions. As the ship slipped into the darkness, the crew braced themselves for what lay ahead, knowing that their journey was far from over. In the end, Wyatt's sacrifice had given them more than just survival, it had opened a door to something vast and unknowable. Whether it was salvation or destruction, they didn't yet know. But they would face it together, just as they always had. Somewhere in the depths of space, the black ship waited, its purpose still shrouded in mystery. And as the Odyssey ventured into the unknown, the crew couldn't help but wonder, had they set out to find the black ship or had it been waiting for them all along?